Picture this. You're a Portuguese plantation owner in 1600s Brazil, walking past your enslaved workers during their evening gathering. You see them moving to rhythmic beats, laughing, celebrating what looks like a harmless dance. You smile, thinking how content they seem. What you don't realize is that you're witnessing one of the most brilliant acts of resistance in martial arts history. Those dancers are actually practicing deadly combat techniques that could overpower you in seconds. Welcome to the incredible true story of Capoeira, Brazil's secret martial art disguised as dance. Our story begins in the bustling ports of West and Central Africa during the 1500s, where an unimaginable human tragedy was unfolding. Over the course of 3 centuries, an estimated 12.5 million Africans would be forcibly transported to the Americas in what historians call the largest forced migration in human history. Brazil alone received nearly 40% of all enslaved people brought to the New World. Approximately 5 million souls crammed into disease-ridden ships for voyages that lasted months. But here's what makes this story different from other tales of oppression. Among those millions were some of Africa's most skilled warriors and fighters. The Portuguese deliberately targeted specific regions known for their military prowess, particularly the Kingdom of Ndongo in present-day Angola. These weren't just farmers or craftspeople. They were trained combatants with centuries-old fighting traditions passed down through generations. The most significant martial tradition came from the Bantu-speaking peoples of Angola, who practiced Ngolo, a ritualistic combat dance performed during coming-of-age ceremonies and harvest festivals. Picture young warriors forming circles under the African sun, using only their feet, hands, and heads in fluid, circular movements that looked like deadly ballet. No weapons were allowed, only the human body as the ultimate fighting instrument. Ngolo wasn't just about individual combat. It was a complete system that included music, community gathering, spiritual elements, and complex rules of engagement. Winners gained respect and often the right to marry, while the practice itself strengthened community bonds and maintained military readiness. When slave ships arrived at these coastal regions, Portuguese traders unknowingly loaded their vessels with some of Africa's most sophisticated martial artists. These warriors carried something more valuable than gold in their minds: knowledge that would survive the Middle Passage and transform into something the world had never seen. The irony is staggering. The very people Portuguese colonizers sought to control possessed skills that could easily overpower their captors. But scattered across different plantations, separated by language barriers, and facing brutal working conditions, these fighters needed to find new ways to preserve and share their knowledge. If you really enjoy fascinating historical stories like this one, I'd genuinely appreciate it if you could hit that like button and consider subscribing. It truly helps me reach other people who might enjoy discovering these amazing untold stories too. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. Thank you so much for being here. And let's dive into this remarkable tale. Life on Brazilian sugar plantations makes modern understanding of hardship seem trivial. Enslaved people worked 18-hour days under the scorching tropical sun, cutting sugarcane with primitive tools, while overseers on horseback watched their every move. The mortality rate was so catastrophic that plantation owners calculated it was more economical to work people to death and buy replacements than to provide adequate food, shelter, or medical care. The average life expectancy after arrival was just 7 years. 7 years to live, work, and die in conditions designed to break both body and spirit. Yet within this nightmare, something extraordinary began happening that would change martial arts history forever. The Angolan fighters, despite being scattered across different plantations, began recognizing each other through subtle movements and gestures. They started teaching their Ngolo techniques to fellow enslaved people from other African regions: Yoruba warriors from present-day Nigeria, Hausa fighters from the Sahel region, and coastal peoples from various West African kingdoms. This cross-cultural exchange created something entirely new: a fusion martial art that combined the best techniques from multiple African fighting traditions. But here's where the story takes its most brilliant turn. These fighters realized that practicing openly would mean instant death or severe punishment. Portuguese overseers were constantly watching for signs of rebellion, and organized fighting training would have been seen as preparation for uprising. So, they created the most ingenious deception in martial arts history. They disguised their combat training as joyful celebration and dance. Every deadly technique was camouflaged as a party movement. A devastating leg sweep that could drop an armed overseer became a flowing rhythmic dance step. Defensive dodges that could avoid sword strikes transformed into joyful body sways and spins. Powerful kicks capable of breaking bones looked like exuberant leaps of celebration. The psychological warfare aspect was brilliant. Portuguese colonizers, despite their cruelty, actually encouraged what they perceived as harmless cultural expression. Colonial authorities believed that allowing enslaved people to maintain some African traditions would prevent rebellions by providing emotional outlets. They had no idea they were witnessing the birth of the most sophisticated disguised combat training system ever developed. Masters of this new art developed an entire vocabulary of deception. They learned to shift instantly between genuine celebration and combat readiness. When an overseer approached, the dance would become more theatrical and obviously harmless. The moment authority figures left, the movements would subtly shift back to serious martial training. Training sessions occurred during the few hours of rest after backbreaking workdays. Exhausted fighters would gather in plantation quarters, using flickering candlelight or moonlight to practice techniques that might one day save their lives. They developed ways to train silently, learning to move without making sounds that might alert sleeping overseers or suspicious house servants. But the deception went far deeper than just disguised movements. The practitioners developed an intricate musical communication system so sophisticated that it remained undetected for centuries. This is where the story becomes truly mind-blowing, because they essentially created a musical language for coordinating resistance activities. The berimbau became the centerpiece of this conspiracy. This deceptively simple instrument, just a wooden bow with a metal string and a gourd resonator, could produce an amazing variety of sounds and rhythms. To Portuguese ears, it was primitive music accompanying harmless dancing. To trained practitioners, it was a complex communication device capable of transmitting detailed information. Different berimbau rhythms signaled specific situations and instructions. The Angola rhythm indicated safe conditions for serious training. The Sao Bento Grande pattern warned that overseers were approaching and movements should become more dance-like. The Cavalleria rhythm was an emergency signal, indicating immediate danger and the need to scatter or act completely innocent. But the musical codes went even deeper. Experienced players could modulate the berimbau's pitch and rhythm to indicate specific techniques to practice, the skill level of practitioners in the circle, and even coordinate timing for group movements. A subtle rhythm change might signal when to execute a particularly dangerous technique or when someone untrained was watching. The songs themselves contained layers of meaning that would make modern cryptographers jealous. While Portuguese colonizers might hear lyrics about everyday plantation life, love, or African nostalgia, the words actually contained multiple coded messages. References to animals often described specific fighting techniques. The snake's movement referred to ground fighting patterns. The bird's flight described aerial kicks, and the cat's patience indicated defensive waiting strategies. Two other instruments joined this musical resistance network. The atabaque, a tall drum played with hands, provided the foundational rhythm and could communicate basic information across longer distances. Its deep tones could travel between plantation buildings, alerting practitioners in different areas about training opportunities or danger. The pandero, similar to a tambourine but played with complex finger techniques, added sophisticated rhythmic layers that contained detailed tactical information. Expert pandero players could indicate the number of people in a training circle, the experience level of participants, and even specific techniques being practiced, all while creating music that sounded like pure entertainment to untrained listeners. This musical system served another crucial strategic purpose. It was completely portable and required no written records that could be discovered and used as evidence of conspiracy. The entire communication system existed in the minds and muscle memory of practitioners, making it nearly impossible for authorities to intercept or decode. When enslaved people from different plantations met during rare market days, religious festivals, or shared work projects, they could instantly communicate through music, sharing new techniques, coordinating activities, and maintaining the network of resistance that connected practitioners across vast geographic areas. While plantation capoeira required constant disguise and careful concealment, there were extraordinary places where this martial art could be practiced openly and developed to its absolute full potential. These were the Quilombos, fortified communities of escaped enslaved people hidden deep in Brazil's mountainous interior. where capoeira transformed from a disguised survival tool into a sophisticated military science. The most legendary was Quilombos dos Palmares, located in the Serra da Barriga Mountains of present-day Alagoas state. This wasn't just a hideaway, it was essentially an independent African kingdom that existed in the heart of Portuguese colonial Brazil. At its peak between 1605 and 1694, Palmares housed over 30,000 people across multiple fortified settlements, with its own government, military, agriculture, and culture. Here, capoeira evolved into something the Portuguese had never encountered: a complete martial system designed specifically to counter European military tactics. Without the need for disguise or deception, fighters could explore every aspect of combat applications, developing techniques that would prove devastatingly effective against traditional European warfare. The Quilombo fighters, led by legendary leaders like Ganga Zumba and later Zumbi dos Palmares, transformed capoeira into organized military training. They developed group fighting techniques where multiple capoeiristas could coordinate attacks against armed soldiers. They created formations that used capoeira's mobility and unpredictability to counter the rigid formation-based tactics of Portuguese colonial forces. Archaeological evidence from Quilombo sites reveals sophisticated training facilities specifically designed for capoeira practice. Researchers have discovered circular clearings surrounded by defensive earthworks, suggesting that martial arts training was integral to these communities' military preparedness. Training areas show evidence of systematic instruction, with different spaces apparently designated for beginners, intermediate practitioners, and advanced fighters. The effectiveness of Quilombo capoeira was proven in battle after battle. Portuguese colonial forces, despite possessing superior weapons, armor, and formal military training, struggled for nearly a century to defeat these communities. European soldiers trained in predictable sword and musket warfare found themselves completely unprepared for fighters whose movements defied conventional military logic. Fluid, unpredictable, and grounded in centuries of tactical knowledge. Colonial military reports from the period describe Quilombo fighters with a mixture of fear and bewilderment. Portuguese officers wrote about enemies who could fight like demons, appearing to dance while delivering devastating attacks, moving like wild animals, in ways that made them nearly impossible to target with firearms or engage with swords. The Quilombos proved that capoeira wasn't just a clever disguise. It was a genuinely superior fighting system when applied by skilled practitioners against conventional military forces. These mountain communities demonstrated that the art developed in plantation circles was capable of challenging the military might of a European colonial empire. As Brazil moved toward abolition in the late 1800s, capoeira began appearing in urban areas, particularly in Rio de Janeiro and Salvador. Here it evolved again, adapting to city life while maintaining its essential character. Former enslaved people and their descendants brought plantation and quilombo techniques into urban environments, creating a new chapter in capoeira's development. In the cities, capoeira became associated with the maltas, organized groups that were part martial arts schools, part social clubs, and part territorial gangs. These groups had complex hierarchies, elaborate initiation ceremonies, and fierce rivalries that sometimes erupted into spectacular street battles that amazed and terrified urban authorities. The urban capoeiristas developed new techniques suited to fighting in narrow streets, on stone surfaces, and around buildings. They created weapons training using everyday urban objects. Knives, razors, and sticks became extensions of capoeira movement. The art adapted to different surfaces, learning to use walls, stairs, and architectural features as part of combat strategy. But urban capoeira also faced its greatest threat. As Brazil transitioned from empire to republic after 1889, the new government viewed capoeira as a symbol of everything the modern nation wanted to leave behind: slavery, African influence, and social disorder. The Republican Criminal Code of 1890 didn't just discourage capoeira. It specifically criminalized its practice, with penalties ranging from 2 to 6 months in prison. For nearly 4 decades, from 1890 to the 1930s, capoeira survived in the shadows, practiced in secret locations by people risking imprisonment or worse. This period saw the development of even more sophisticated concealment techniques as practitioners learned to hide their activities from police forces specifically trained to recognize and arrest capoeiristas. Many techniques were lost during this dark period as masters were imprisoned, killed, or forced to abandon their practice. Entire regional styles disappeared as communities were scattered and oral traditions broken. The art that had survived centuries of slavery nearly died during Brazil's early Republican period. Yet dedicated masters found ways to preserve essential knowledge. They developed new training methods that could be practiced in small spaces, taught techniques through seemingly innocent physical activities, and maintained networks of practitioners across different cities. Some masters left Brazil entirely, taking their knowledge to other South American countries where they could practice more freely. The underground period actually strengthened certain aspects of capoeira culture. The shared danger created intense bonds between practitioners, and the secrecy required elevated the art's spiritual and ritual elements. Masters who continued teaching during this period became legendary figures, revered not just for their martial skills, but for their courage in preserving cultural heritage under threat of imprisonment. Then came two remarkable men who would literally save capoeira from extinction and transform it into a globally recognized art form. Their approaches were completely different, but both proved essential to capoeira's survival and growth. Manuel dos Reis Machado, known as Mestre Bimba, took a revolutionary approach that challenged everything about capoeira's underground status. Born in Salvador in 1899, Bimba learned traditional capoeira from his father and other street masters. But instead of accepting capoeira's criminalized status, he decided to legitimize it through systematization and academic respectability. In 1932, Bimba opened the first official capoeira school in Salvador, the Academia Escola de Capoeira Regional. This wasn't just a training space, it was a direct challenge to the government's ban on capoeira practice. Bimba created formal curricula, established ranking systems, developed standardized teaching methods, and even required students to demonstrate academic progress in regular schools before advancing in capoeira training. His style, called Capoeira Regional, incorporated techniques from other martial arts, emphasized the combat effectiveness of movements, and stripped away some traditional ritual elements that he felt made capoeira seem primitive to modern eyes. Bimba's students included doctors, lawyers, and other professionals who helped change public perception of capoeira from criminal activity to sophisticated physical education. Vicente Ferreira Pastinha, known as Mestre Pastinha, took an entirely different but equally important approach. Born in Salvador in 1889, Pastinha focused on preserving capoeira's traditional elements, its spiritual connections, ritual aspects, musical complexity, and community-building functions. His style, called Capoeira Angola, maintained direct links to the art's African roots and plantation origins. Mestre Pastinha established the Centro Esportivo de Capoeira Angola in 1941, creating a school that functioned more like a cultural center than a martial arts academy. His students learned not just fighting techniques but also instrument making, song composition, capoeira history, and the philosophical principles underlying the art. Pastinha viewed capoeira as a complete cultural system, not just a fighting method. Both masters faced incredible challenges, convincing Brazilian society that capoeira represented culture rather than criminality. They had to overcome decades of negative stereotypes, police harassment, and social prejudice while building legitimate institutions that could preserve and transmit capoeira knowledge to future generations. Their success was remarkable. By the 1940s, capoeira demonstrations were being performed for government officials. By the 1950s, it was appearing in Brazilian films and being recognized as a national cultural treasure. The art that had been criminalized for nearly half a century was becoming a source of Brazilian pride. A nation that once outlawed capoeira would now embrace it as a symbol of cultural identity. The transformation of capoeira from persecuted practice to international phenomenon represents one of the most dramatic cultural reversals in modern history. Beginning in the 1960s, Brazilian capoeira masters started traveling internationally, establishing schools and communities that would spread the art to every continent. The first international capoeira schools appeared in the United States and Europe during the 1970s, established by Brazilian masters who recognized opportunities to share their culture with global audiences. These pioneers faced enormous challenges, teaching an art form that combined martial techniques, musical skills, Portuguese language, and Brazilian cultural concepts to students who had never experienced anything similar. What's remarkable is how capoeira maintained its essential character while adapting to vastly different cultural environments. Whether practiced in a New York gymnasium, a London community center, or a Tokyo martial arts school, Capoeira retained its circular formation, musical elements, Portuguese lyrics, and emphasis on community over competition. The art's global spread accelerated dramatically with the rise of international communication and travel. By the 1990s, capoeira schools existed in over 50 countries. Today, practitioners can be found in more than 150 nations, from Arctic communities in Alaska to urban centers in Southeast Asia. Modern technology has transformed capoeira education while preserving its traditional elements. Masters now conduct online classes, share techniques through video platforms, and coordinate international events that bring together practitioners from around the world. Yet the fundamental structure, the rota, circle, the music, the call and response songs, and the emphasis on community remains unchanged from its plantation origins. In 2014, capoeira achieved its ultimate vindication when UNESCO recognized it as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity. This designation acknowledged capoeira's significance not just as a martial art, but as a form of cultural expression that embodies resistance, creativity, community building, and artistic achievement. The UNESCO recognition specifically highlighted capoeira's role in promoting social integration, memory preservation, and cultural identity. The organization noted how the art continues to serve marginalized communities worldwide, providing opportunities for physical development, cultural education, and community connection that echo its original functions in Brazilian slave communities. This international recognition represents an extraordinary journey from criminalized activity to celebrated cultural heritage. The art that was once punishable by imprisonment is now protected and promoted by international cultural organizations. Looking back at this incredible 500-year journey, capoeira represents something far more significant than martial arts history. It demonstrates the remarkable human capacity for adaptation, creativity, and resistance under the most oppressive circumstances imaginable. Those African warriors who first stepped onto Brazilian shores could never have imagined that their survival strategy would become a global phenomenon celebrated by millions. They created something that transcended its original purpose, a practice that builds community, preserves culture, bridges differences, and continues to inspire people facing their own struggles for freedom and expression. Modern capoeira practitioners, known as capoeiristas, participate in a living tradition that connects them directly to those plantation circles where enslaved people disguised combat as celebration. Every rota recreates that original act of resistance where people gather to share knowledge, build community, and celebrate human resilience. The next time you see capoeira performed, whether in a Brazilian rota, an international festival, or a local demonstration, remember that you're witnessing the culmination of centuries of human ingenuity. You're seeing the art form that proved the human spirit, no matter how oppressed, will always find ways to preserve what matters most. From the African kingdoms where Ngolo was born, through the nightmare of slave ships and plantation brutality, to the mountain Quilombos where it became a weapon of liberation, to the modern academies where it builds bridges between cultures, capoeira remains what it always was. A testament to the power of resistance, creativity, and the unbreakable human will to remain free, even in chains. The circle continues, the berimbau sings, and the legacy of those ingenious ancestors lives on in every movement, every song, and every gathering where people come together to celebrate the art that disguises combat as dance and transforms survival into beauty.